The scorching summer sun beat down on the Colorado wilderness as Olivia Remington clutched her swollen belly and stared into the abyss below. One wrong step on the crumbling cliff edge would send her plummeting hundreds of feet to the jagged rocks below. The year was 1878, and out here in the untamed West, a pregnant woman alone might as well have been a wounded deer among wolves. "Help!" she cried out, her voice barely carrying over the howling wind that threatened to push her off the narrow ledge. Her tears mixed with sweat as another contraction seized her body. "Please, someone help me." The baby wasn't due for another month, but the stress of her situation seemed to have triggered an early labor. Olivia had fled her home in Denver 3 days earlier, determined to reach her sister's homestead near Durango before her husband discovered where she had gone. Now, lost and trapped after a missed turn on the mountain trail, she wondered if she would live to see another sunrise. Vaughn Jameson had been tracking a wounded buck for the better part of the afternoon when he heard the faint cry carried on the wind. He pulled on the reins of his chestnut stallion, Copper, and tilted his head to listen. There it was again, a woman's voice. "Whoa, boy," he murmured, guiding his horse toward the sound. As a former Army scout turned bounty hunter, Vaughn had developed a keen sense for trouble, and every instinct told him someone was in dire straits. He dismounted quickly when he reached the edge of a steep drop. Crawling forward on his belly, he peered over the rim and saw her, a young woman with auburn hair, dressed in a dusty blue dress, clutching the face of the cliff with white knuckles. Even from this distance, he could see the swell of her pregnancy. "Madam, don't move." He called down to her, his deep voice cutting through the wind. "I'm coming to help." Olivia looked up, hardly daring to believe someone had heard her. A man with a weathered face and intense eyes was looking down at her from above. His wide-brimmed hat was secured against the wind by a leather cord under his chin, and his face was shadowed with several days' worth of beard. "Please hurry," she begged, feeling the ledge beneath her shift slightly. "I don't think it will hold much longer." Vaughn sprang into action, uncoiling the rope from his saddle. He tied one end securely around a sturdy boulder and the other around his waist. Without hesitation, he began lowering himself down the cliff face, his boots finding footholds in the rock as he descended. "What's your name, madam?" He called, trying to keep her focused as another gust of wind buffeted them both. "Olivia," she replied, her voice trembling. "Olivia Remington. I'm Vaughn Jameson. Just hold on tight, Olivia, I've got you." When he reached her, Vaughn could see the terror in her eyes and something else that concerned him greatly. Her face was contorted with pain that came in waves, and her breathing was labored in a rhythm he recognized all too well from when his sister had given birth. "Are you in labor?" he asked, securing his footing on the narrow ledge beside her. Olivia nodded, biting her lip as another contraction gripped her. "It started a few hours ago. I think the baby's coming early." Vaughn's expression remained calm despite the gravity of the situation. "We need to get you up top. Can you hold on to me?" "I'll try," she whispered. With careful movements, Vaughn secured the rope around both of them, creating a makeshift harness that would keep Olivia safe against his body. He positioned himself between her and the cliff face. "When I say now, I need you to wrap your arms around my neck and hold on as tight as you can. Don't worry about hurting me, just don't let go." Olivia nodded, gathering what little strength she had left. "Now," Vaughn commanded. She threw her arms around his neck as he locked one arm securely around her waist, being careful of her belly. With his free hand, he gripped the rope and began the arduous process of pulling them both up the cliff face. Every movement was calculated, every handhold tested before he committed his weight. Olivia's body shuddered against his as another contraction hit, but she didn't cry out. She merely tightened her grip and buried her face in his shoulder. "You're doing great," he encouraged her through gritted teeth, the strain of their combined weight testing his strength. "Just a little further." After what seemed like an eternity, Vaughn's hand reached the edge of the cliff. With a surge of effort that sent pain shooting through his shoulders, he hauled them both over the rim and onto solid ground. Olivia collapsed onto her back, gasping for breath as Vaughn quickly untied the rope from around them. He barely had time to catch his breath before she cried out, clutching her abdomen. The contractions are getting closer, she panted. Vaughn scanned the horizon. The sun was beginning to set, and they were at least half a day's ride from the nearest town. Making a swift decision, he gathered Olivia into his arms. I've got a camp set up about a mile from here. It's not much, but it's sheltered and there's water. Can you hold on that long? Olivia nodded weakly. I don't have much choice, do I? Vaughn carried her to where Copper waited patiently, the horse whickering softly as they approached. With careful movements, he helped Olivia onto the saddle before mounting behind her, one arm secure around her waist to keep her steady. Lean back against me, he instructed, and she did, her body fitting against his as though they'd ridden together 100 times before. That's it, just try to relax. As they rode, Vaughn learned bits and pieces of Olivia's story. She was 22, fleeing from a husband who had turned cruel after their marriage 2 years prior. When she had discovered she was expecting, Harrison Remington's violence had escalated, fueled by whiskey and gambling debts. He said the child wasn't his, Olivia explained, her voice hollow. Said I had been unfaithful. But I swear to you, Mr. Jameson, I never— You don't need to explain anything to me, Mrs. Remington, Vaughn cut in gently. And it's just Vaughn. Then you must call me Olivia, she replied, before tensing as another contraction gripped her. By the time they reached Vaughn's camp, a small clearing beside a creek with a lean to shelter, Olivia's contractions were coming every few minutes. Vaughn helped her down from the horse and laid her on his bedroll inside the shelter. I'm no doctor, he admitted as he built up the fire and put water on to boil. But I've helped birth foals and calves, and I was there when my sister had her boy. Olivia managed a weak smile. That's more experience than I have. As the night deepened around them, Olivia's labor intensified. Vaughn did what he could to make her comfortable, wiping her brow with a cool cloth and holding her hand through the worst of the contractions. When she cried out in pain, he spoke to her in low, soothing tones, telling her stories of his travels to distract her. You're the strongest woman I've ever met, he told her honestly as she gripped his hand so tightly he thought the bones might break. Most folks would have given up on that ledge, but not you. I couldn't, she gasped. Not with my baby depending on me. Hours passed, and as the first light of dawn crept over the eastern horizon, Olivia's labor reached its peak. Vaughn positioned himself at her feet, ready to help bring her child into the world. When I tell you to push, give it everything you've got, he instructed, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Olivia nodded, her face slick with sweat, her knuckles white as she gripped the edges of the bedroll. Push now, Vaughn commanded. With a cry that echoed through the mountains, Olivia bore down. Again and again she pushed, following Vaughn's instructions until, with one final tremendous effort, her baby slid into Vaughn's waiting hands. It's a girl, he announced, his voice thick with emotion as the tiny infant let out a lusty wail. A perfect little girl. Using his cleanest bandana and water from his canteen, Vaughn cleaned the newborn as best he could before wrapping her in his spare shirt and placing her in Olivia's arms. She's beautiful, Olivia whispered, tears streaming down her face as she gazed at her daughter. Hello, my darling, I'm your mama. Vaughn turned away, giving mother and child a moment of privacy as he tended to the practical matters of the birth. When he looked back, Olivia was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Thank you, she said simply. You saved both our lives today. Vaughn nodded, suddenly self-conscious. Anyone would have done the same. No, Olivia disagreed. Not anyone, not him. Over the next 3 days, they remained at the camp. Vaughn hunted and cooked, brought water, and fashioned a crude cradle for the baby from his saddlebags. He watched in wonder as Olivia nursed her daughter, marveling at the miracle of new life and the fierce love in the young mother's eyes. On the evening of the 3rd day, as they sat by the fire with the baby sleeping peacefully in her makeshift cradle, Olivia finally asked the question that had been on her mind. Why are you helping us? You could have taken us to town and been on your way. Vaughn stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. I know what it's like to be alone and afraid. My ma died when I was 8. Pa took to the bottle after that, and I practically raised my sister. He poked at the fire with a stick. Besides, there's something about you that— Well, I couldn't just leave you. Olivia studied his face in the firelight. At 30, Vaughn Jameson had lived a hard life. She could see it in the lines around his eyes, the scars on his hands, the wariness that never quite left his expression. Yet there was kindness there too, and a gentleness that belied his rugged exterior. "What will you do now?" he asked. "Continue to my sister's place, I suppose," Olivia replied. "She has a small homestead near Durango. Her husband died of fever last winter, so she's alone with her 2 boys." Vaughn nodded slowly. "That's still a good 4 days' ride from here, and that's in good weather with a strong horse." He glanced at the baby. "It won't be easy with a newborn." "I don't have many options," Olivia said quietly. "I could take you," Vaughn offered, the words coming out before he had fully formed the thought. "I mean, I was heading in that direction anyway. There's a bounty in Silverton I've been tracking." Olivia's eyes widened. "You're a bounty hunter, among other things," Vaughn admitted. "I track men who have broken the law. Bring them in for the reward money. It's not the most respectable profession, but it pays well enough." To his surprise, Olivia didn't recoil from this revelation. Instead, she nodded thoughtfully. "At least you're on the right side of the law." "That's more than I can say for Harrison." The next morning, they prepared to break camp. Vaughn fashioned a sling from one of his shirts so that Olivia could carry the baby against her chest while riding. He packed his meager supplies and saddled Copper, who seemed to understand the importance of his cargo and stood patiently as Vaughn helped Olivia mount. "What have you named her?" Vaughn asked as Olivia settled the baby in the sling. Olivia looked down at her daughter's peaceful face. "Victoria," she decided. "It means victory because she survived against the odds." She hesitated. "And Jameson for a middle name, if that's all right with you." Vaughn felt a lump form in his throat. "That's more than all right," he managed to say. They traveled slowly, stopping frequently for Olivia to feed Victoria and rest. Vaughn was a quiet companion but attentive to their needs. Each night, he built a fire and prepared a simple meal before setting up shelter for Olivia and the baby, while he slept under the stars. On the third night of their journey, a spring storm blew in from the mountains. The temperature dropped rapidly as rain began to pelt down, quickly soaking through their makeshift camp. Vaughn hurriedly constructed a more substantial lean-to, using his oilskin coat as additional protection against the elements. "You'll have to share," he told Olivia as he ushered her and Victoria into the small space. "Body heat will keep the baby warm." Despite his practical tone, Vaughn felt distinctly uncomfortable as he settled beside Olivia in the confined space, their bodies pressed together by necessity. He was acutely aware of her scent, a mix of wildflowers, and something uniquely her and the softness of her body against his. "Are you warm enough?" he asked, his voice gruffer than he intended. "Yes," Olivia answered, though he could feel her shivering slightly. Without thinking, he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer to his chest. "Better," he murmured. "Better," she agreed, and he felt her gradually relax against him. They lay like that through the night, the baby nestled between them while the storm raged outside. Vaughn remained awake long after Olivia had fallen asleep, listening to her steady breathing and the occasional soft sounds Victoria made in her slumber. It had been years since Vaughn had allowed himself to be this close to another person. After losing his sister to tuberculosis 5 years prior, he had deliberately kept to himself, taking jobs that required solitude and avoiding attachments. Yet here he was, holding this young woman and her child as if they belonged to him. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it filled him with a strange sense of peace. Morning brought clear skies and an awkward awareness between them. Olivia busied herself with Victoria while Vaughn prepared the horses, both of them careful to maintain some distance after the intimacy of the night before. As they rode that day, however, Olivia seemed to have come to some decision. She began to ask Vaughn questions about his life, where he had grown up, how he had become a bounty hunter, what places he had seen in his travels. To his own surprise, Vaughn found himself answering freely, telling her stories he had never shared with anyone. "Have you ever thought of settling down?" Olivia asked as they made camp that evening. "Having a place of your own, maybe a family." Vaughn stoked the fire, buying time before he answered. "I did once," he admitted, Had a girl back in Missouri. Sarah was her name. We were going to get married after I came back from the war." "What happened?" Olivia asked softly. "She couldn't wait," Vaughn said, the old hurt dulled now to a distant ache. "Married a shopkeeper's son while I was fighting at Vicksburg. Can't blame her, really. She wanted security, a home. I couldn't give her that then." "And now?" Olivia pressed gently. Vaughn looked up, meeting her eyes across the fire. "Now I've learned it's safer to rely only on myself." Olivia's gaze didn't waver. "That sounds lonely." "It is," he acknowledged, and something shifted between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the recognition of a shared solitude. The next day brought them to the outskirts of a small settlement. Vaughn insisted they stop to purchase supplies and proper clothing for Victoria, using some of the money he had saved from his last bounty. Olivia protested, but he was firm. "The baby needs proper things," he insisted. "And you could use a hot meal and a real bed for a night." The general store was run by a plump, friendly woman named Mrs. Potter, who cooed over Victoria and insisted on helping Olivia select everything the baby might need. While the women were occupied, Vaughn slipped out to the telegraph office to send a message to the sheriff in Silverton, letting him know that the bounty he was tracking would have to wait. They took a room at the town's only boarding house, a respectable establishment run by a widow who looked Vaughn up and down suspiciously, until Olivia quickly explained that he was her brother, escorting her to her sister's home after her husband's death. The lie came so smoothly that Vaughn raised an eyebrow at her once the widow had left them alone. "My brother?" he questioned, amusement tugging at the corners of his mouth. Olivia blushed. "I thought it would be easier than explaining the truth. Besides, she might not have let us stay otherwise." "Fair enough," Vaughn conceded. "I'll sleep in the barn with the horses." "You don't have to do that," Olivia said quickly. "The room has 2 beds. We've already spent 3 nights in much closer quarters." Vaughn hesitated, knowing it wasn't proper but reluctant to be separated from them. "If you're sure." "I'm sure," Olivia said firmly. "Victoria and I sleep better knowing you're nearby." That night, after a proper meal and baths for both Olivia and the baby, they retired to their room. Victoria, clean and fed, fell asleep almost instantly in the drawer Vaughn had lined with blankets to serve as a cradle. Olivia, wearing a new nightdress purchased that day, sat on the edge of her bed brushing out her long auburn hair. Vaughn tried not to stare, but the lamplight caught in her hair, turning it to liquid copper, and he found himself mesmerized by the simple, intimate gesture. When she caught him watching, he expected her to be embarrassed or angry. Instead, she smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes and made something catch in his chest. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." "You don't need to keep thanking me," Vaughn replied, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Yes, I do," Olivia insisted. "You've given up your job, your supplies, your comfort for us. Most men wouldn't do that for a woman and child who are nothing to them." The words, "nothing to them," stung more than they should have. Vaughn was silent for a long moment before he spoke again. "You're not nothing to me," he said finally, his voice low. "I don't know what you are exactly, but not nothing." Olivia's brush stilled in her hair as she looked at him, her eyes wide and searching. "What am I then?" Vaughn stood abruptly, unable to articulate the feelings swirling within him. "I should check on the horses," he muttered, grabbing his hat and heading for the door. "Vaughn," Olivia called after him, but he was already gone, taking the stairs 2 at a time as he fled the confines of the room and the emotions he wasn't ready to confront. Outside in the cool night air, Vaughn leaned against the wall of the boarding house and took several deep breaths. What was happening to him? In the space of less than a week, this woman and her child had somehow burrowed under his skin, making him feel things he had deliberately avoided for years. He spent an hour in the stables with Copper, brushing the horse and checking his tack repeatedly until he felt calm enough to return to the room. When he did, Olivia was asleep, her hair spread across the pillow like a fan of fire. Victoria slumbered peacefully in her makeshift cradle, one tiny fist curled beside her cheek. Vaughn removed his boots and stretched out on his bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling as sleep eluded him. How had his life changed so completely in less than a week? The final day of their journey dawned bright and clear. They left the settlement behind, Olivia refreshed from a night in a real bed, and Victoria outfitted with proper baby clothes and blankets. Vaughn was quieter than usual, still unsettled by the revelations of the previous night. As they rode, Olivia began to recognize landmarks from her previous visits to her sister's homestead. "We're getting close," she announced as they crested a hill and saw smoke rising from a chimney in the valley below. "That's it, that's Ellen's place." Vaughn felt a peculiar hollowness in his chest at her obvious excitement. Of course she was eager to reach safety, to be with family. Their time together had always had an expiration date. The small cabin came into view as they descended into the valley, a modest but well-maintained structure with a barn and corral beside it. A vegetable garden was visible, and chickens scratched in the yard. Two young boys, perhaps 8 and 10, were chopping wood near the porch. As they approached, the boys spotted them and ran inside, presumably to alert their mother. Moments later, a woman who strongly resembled Olivia emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. Her expression transformed from wariness to shock to joy as she recognized her sister. "Olivia," she cried, rushing forward as Vaughn helped Olivia dismount. "Oh my God, we got your letter but weren't expecting you for another week at least. And the baby," she broke off, noticing Victoria for the first time. "You've had your child already." "It's a long story," Olivia said, embracing her sister with one arm while cradling Victoria with the other. "Ellen, this is Vaughn Jameson. He saved our lives." Ellen turned to Vaughn, gratitude and curiosity mingling in her expression. "Then we owe you a debt we can never repay, Mr. Jameson." "Please come inside. You must be exhausted from your journey." Vaughn shifted uncomfortably, suddenly feeling like an intruder. "I should be moving on," he said. "Got business in Silverton." "Nonsense," Ellen insisted. "At least stay for a meal and to rest your horse. I won't take no for an answer." Inside the cabin, Vaughn sat awkwardly at the kitchen table while the sisters caught up. Olivia told a sanitized version of their meeting and journey, downplaying the danger she had been in when Vaughn found her. The boys, Isaac and Matthew, peppered Vaughn with questions about his life as a bounty hunter, which he answered as vaguely as possible. When Ellen took Victoria to change her, leaving Olivia and Vaughn alone with the boys, Olivia turned to him with concern in her eyes. "You don't have to leave right away," she said quietly. "Ellen meant it when she said you're welcome here." Vaughn shook his head. "Best I move on, that bounty won't collect itself. Will you at least stay the night? The boys would love to hear more of your stories." She paused, then added softly, "And so would I." Against his better judgment, Vaughn agreed. One more night couldn't hurt, he reasoned. One more night to ensure Olivia and Victoria were truly settled and safe. That evening, after the boys were in bed, the 3 adults sat around the fire. Ellen, sensing something unspoken between her sister and the taciturn bounty hunter, made an excuse about needing to check on the boys and retired early, leaving Olivia and Vaughn alone. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, watching the flames dance in the hearth. It was Olivia who finally broke the silence. "What will you do after Silverton?" she asked. Vaughn shrugged. "There's always another job, another town." "Always another lonely trail," Olivia observed. "It's what I know," Vaughn replied simply. Olivia turned to face him fully. "It doesn't have to be. You could know something else if you wanted to." Vaughn met her gaze, reading the invitation in her eyes. "Olivia, you don't owe me anything. Certainly not. That's not what I'm offering," she said quietly. "And it's not about owing you, it's about—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "It's about how I feel when I'm with you, safe, seen, like maybe I could have a future that isn't defined by fear." Vaughn's heart thundered in his chest. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Olivia countered. "I know you risked your life for a stranger. I know you've been gentle with my daughter from the moment she was born. I know you could have abandoned us at any time, but you didn't." "That doesn't make me special," Vaughn protested. "Just decent." "Decent is special in a world where men like Harrison exist," Olivia said, a shadow crossing her face at the mention of her husband. "Besides, there's more to it than that, and you know it." Vaughn stood abruptly, moving to the window to put some distance between them. "You're confused, grateful." "It's natural to mix that up with other feelings." Olivia rose as well, following him, Don't tell me what I feel, Vaughn Jameson. I've had enough of men doing that to last a lifetime. I'm not the kind of man who stays in one place, Vaughn warned her. I wouldn't know how to be a father to Victoria or a partner to you. You've been both for the past week, Olivia pointed out. And you've done just fine. A week isn't a lifetime, Vaughn argued, but his resolve was weakening in the face of her certainty. No, Olivia agreed, stepping closer to him. But it could be a beginning. Before he could formulate another objection, Olivia rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a demand. Vaughn remained frozen for a heartbeat before his arms came around her, drawing her closer as he returned the kiss with a hunger that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. "This is madness," he whispered. "Maybe," Olivia conceded. "Or maybe it's the first sane thing either of us has done in a very long time." Morning found them sitting side by side on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the valley in shades of gold and pink. Victoria was nestled in Vaughn's arms, her tiny hand wrapped around his finger as she slept. "I need to tell you something," Olivia said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "Harrison will come looking for me eventually. He won't want me back, but he won't want anyone else to have me either. If you stay, if we try to build something together, you should know the risk." Vaughn looked down at the infant in his arms, then back at Olivia. "Let him come," he said simply. "I've faced worse than a drunken gambler with a mean streak. I don't want you to get hurt because of me," Olivia persisted, "and I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I'd had the courage to stay," Vaughn countered. He shifted Victoria to one arm so he could take Olivia's hand with the other. "I'm not promising it will be easy. I'm not even promising I'll be good at it. But if you're willing to take a chance on me, I'd like to try." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. "I'm willing." 2 months later, Vaughn stood on the porch of the cabin he was building on land adjacent to Ellen's homestead. The walls were up, the roof nearly finished, and soon they would have a home of their own. He watched as Olivia walked toward him across the yard, Victoria growing stronger every day in her arms. "The telegraph came," Olivia said as she joined him on the porch. "The judge in Denver granted my divorce on grounds of cruelty. I'm free." Vaughn pulled her and Victoria into his embrace. "We're all free now," he murmured against her hair. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Vaughn knelt before Olivia on the porch of their nearly completed home. He held out a simple gold band purchased with the bounty money from Silverton, his last job before hanging up his gun for good. "Olivia Remington," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in his stomach. "I'm not a man of many words, and I don't have much to offer except my hands, my heart, and a promise to spend every day trying to be worthy of you and Victoria. Will you marry me?" Olivia's eyes shone with tears as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Vaughn reflected on how drastically his life had changed since that fateful day when he'd heard a desperate cry carried on the wind. He had reached for a stranger on a cliff edge, and in saving her, had somehow saved himself as well. 5 years later, Vaughn Jameson stood on that same porch, watching his family in the yard below. Victoria, now a spirited 5-year-old with her mother's copper hair and his own determined chin, was helping her 3-year-old brother Thomas tend to the garden. Olivia sat nearby on a blanket, their newest addition, 2-month-old Elizabeth, cradled in her arms as she supervised the children's enthusiastic, if somewhat destructive, assistance with the vegetables. The bounty hunter had become a rancher, raising horses on land that expanded a little each year as their hard work paid off. Harrison Remington had indeed come looking for Olivia once, but faced with Vaughn, Ellen's shotgun, and the local sheriff, who happened to be a close friend of Vaughn's from his Army days, he had retreated to Denver and never returned. "Papa," Victoria called, spotting him on the porch. "Come see the carrots we pulled. They look like people." Vaughn chuckled and descended the steps, crossing the yard to join his family. As he settled beside Olivia on the blanket, she leaned against him, her head fitting perfectly against his shoulder just as it had that first night in the wilderness. "Happy," she asked softly. Vaughn looked around at the home they had built, the children they had raised, the love they had forged from the most unlikely of beginnings. More than I ever thought possible, he answered truthfully, pressing a kiss to her temple. From disaster had come deliverance, from desperation had come devotion, and from that perilous cliff edge had come the greatest journey of his life, not one of solitude and wandering, but of love and belonging. And as the sun warmed their little patch of earth in the Colorado wilderness, Vaughn Jameson knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be.